is the News Saturday.
Their adoption rights. Members of the Council for Equal Rights Adoption are lobbying for an open records policy. They say people who are adopted have a right to know who their birth parents are. Current policy of withholding that information is a violation of their civil rights, they say. The group plans a march on Washington tomorrow.
It's 8:45. Do sealed adoption records protect the privacy of birth parents, or are they an inhumane barrier to adoptees who are searching for keys to their past? It's an emotional question that has divided adoption groups. The Council for Equal Rights in Adoption is marching on Washington tomorrow to demand open access to adoption records. March coordinator Joe Soll joins us now from Capitol Hill. And joining us in our studio is Bill Pierce. He is the president of the National Committee for Adoption. He says opening birth records means opening a Pandora's box of problems. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Mr. Soll, let me begin with you there on the Hill, since it's your group that's holding the march tomorrow in Washington around 11 o'clock. What are you calling for?
We are calling for the access to our records as adopted people. We feel that it's a violation of our civil rights and our human rights to not be allowed to know where we come from.
What about the rights of the birth mothers who may have been promised confidentiality, who don't want to see their adopted children?
My experience in helping people for 10 years in searching is that adoptees very rarely get turned down, and confidentiality was imposed on birth mothers. They did not ask for it.
Mr. Pierce, let me turn to you. To some, it seems like the humane thing to do, to open up the birth record so there can be access to medical history so people can at least pick up a phone and call the birth parent at some point. What's wrong with that idea?
Well, the first thing that's wrong is that many of the women who have placed children for adoption, unlike the claims by Mr. Soll, really did need to have confidentiality. Many of these relationships were relationships outside of marriage, and whether it was 20 years ago or 30 years ago or even today, I don't need to tell you that that politicians and other people sometimes engage in activities which need to be kept private. We would in no way stand for a march on Capitol Hill to call for open records for all of the people who have terminated a pregnancy, and that's one way to manage an unplanned pregnancy. So also is adoption.
All right, let's talk specifically here, Mr. Soll.
I think you need to understand that Mr. Pierce is a paid lobbyist and that his organization gets $30 for every baby that is placed through one of their agencies. And they feel it's in their best interest to keep the records closed because they don't think women will surrender children to adoption. It's financial for them. I represent hundreds of thousands of birth mothers that belong to our 200-plus organizations. I have the right to speak for birth mothers. I've been given that right. Mr. Pierce has not been given the right to speak for birth parents.
All right, let's jump in on that. He's made the accusation that your group, that you're protecting, the rights of couples, in effect, who want these babies, as opposed to looking out for the adoptees or the birth mothers.
As Mr. Soll knows very well, if it were not for the fact that most birth mothers do want confidentiality, there wouldn't even be adoption in this country. We're not just talking about birth mothers who voluntarily place their children for adoption. We're also talking about birth fathers who have beaten children, who have burned them with cigarettes, who have had their children taken away from them, put into the foster care system, and who need to have new families that will be left alone. You see, Mr. Soll and the others want the records open so that not only people who have the best of intentions can get together, he wants the records open so that people can intrude on other people's privacy. And from our point of view, the fact is that the Constitution is clear. The Supreme Court has said that people have a right to privacy. They have a right to privacy in the most intimate area of their lives, their sexuality and how they manage their pregnancy. When Mr. Soll talks about money and paid lobbyists and all the rest, that's merely a smokescreen. They want to stick their nose into other people's private sexual business.
Mr. Soll, let me ask, some people are supporting the idea of a registry. I believe Maryland has one now so that a birth parent could sign up, and that way they could be matched up that way for people who voluntarily want to get together. What's wrong with that idea?
The registries don't work, and they are still a violation of the civil right of every person in this country and in the world to know where they come from. In fact, the United Nations and UNICEF signed a treaty with 81 countries in 1991 that gives every person in the world the right to know where they come from. Aside from that, the registries are restrictive. They don't work. They were designed not to work.
Very briefly, tell for people who want to know what is happening tomorrow in Washington, what happens starting at 11 o'clock in Washington?
At 11 o'clock, we have a parade across the mall from the west side of the Capitol reflecting pool to the Lincoln Memorial. And at noon, we have a rally and a speak out and ceremonies to create more awareness of the need to give everyone involved in adoption the right to know each other. There's no right of privacy between a child and its mother.
Quickly, the last word. You've said that your group, unfortunately, will never have marches on Washington because what?
The reason that we can't have marches on Washington is that women who want privacy and children who want privacy are not going to go out and march because people like Joe Soll will say, if you really want privacy, you wouldn't be here. It's a catch-22, and he knows it very well.
All right. Thank you both for coming in. We appreciate it.